The Liberals have been talking an awful lot about the middle class lately. And in fact, they produced a cool chart in their budget to try and demonstrate that middle-class incomes have almost not grown at all in 40 years. Now, that claim was surprising because Conservatives had previously produced data showing that middle-class incomes had skyrocketed over the last decade alone. So I secured the Finance Canada data that was used to create that funky chart I mentioned earlier to try and reconcile the claims. So looking at the data, who is right? Conservatives who claim higher incomes for the middle class in the last 10 years, or Liberals who claim that the middle class has almost had no real raise at all in 4 decades? The answer? Both. How is that possible? How is it possible that Liberals can say, truthfully, that incomes haven't gone up in 4 decades, and Conservatives can simultaneously say, truthfully, that they've gone up dramatically in the last 10 years? Well, look at the chart. In 1976, the median income in Canada in constant inflation-adjusted dollars was $46,300 under the first Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau. But they dropped by $2,800, or 6%, down to $43,500. It then took 30 years to recover incomes back up to $46,500. In other words, the first Trudeau did so much damage to middle incomes in this country that it took almost 3 decades for the Canadian economy to undo that damage. And then, during the subsequent Conservative government, incomes did rise from $44,700 to $49,602, an increase of $5,000 or 11% after inflation. That is according to Liberal budget data. That's the largest increase in median incomes in 40 years. In fact, under our recent Conservative Prime Minister, median incomes grew faster than under the Trudeau, Clark, Turner, Mulroney, Campbell, Chrétien, and Martin governments combined. Again, according to data in the Liberal budget. The question really is, given that this chart, which comes from page 11 of the Liberal government's budget book, demonstrates the overwhelming damage that the first Trudeau did to middle incomes, why would his son produce economic policies that are nearly identical? Rising taxes, spiraling debt, massive government interference and control in the economy, and bailouts for incompetent corporate leaders. Madam Speaker, why would the current government want to repeat the mistakes of a previous Liberal government that took 30 years to reverse? Are they suggesting that we should sacrifice another generation to the damages that always flow from over-intervention of government in the economic life of Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I thought we were going to be talking about small businesses today, but I'm very much interested in the subject matter that the member has raised. You know, it's always interesting. I enjoyed stats courses. Didn't have very many of them, but I did have the opportunity to have discussions with individuals that love to talk about stats. And the numbers always look great and all this kind of stuff. And they can be twisted in different ways, no doubt. But for me, Madam Speaker, when I listen to the member and he says, well, you know, the Liberal Party says this, or it's in the Liberal Party budget says that, and tries to give an impression that things are going in the right direction, and the Conservative Party did this when they were in government, and it appeared as if they were going in the right direction. And then I think he went back to the 70s and early 80s, where he said, well, then it was Pierre Trudeau, and that kind of set us back. Well, I would tend to disagree, especially on the latter point. I think that if you take a look at it and you ask people, what is the difference today if you talk to your constituents, put the numbers to the side and talk about the 70s and the 80s. I was a teenager back then, and I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, when I was a teenager, things were actually going along pretty good for not only me, but also my peers. We had a sense that, we can move out of our house. We could actually acquire the assets, buy a house. We had these dreams and so forth. Madam Speaker, the general feeling at the time was that people had a disposable income, and that disposable income was enabling them to fulfill their dreams. Now, how does that compare over the last 10 years? Check with how many parents will tell you that, I love my son, I love my daughter, but they're 28 years old and they're still living in my basement. They're still living at the in the homes, and we love our children and we want them to be able to stay with us as much as possible. But the point is, Madam Speaker, is that the disposable income is something that's of critical importance in terms of lifestyle and so forth. And I don't believe, if you were to check with my constituents, I believe that they would concur with me on this point, that it seems that they have not had the same sort of money to be able to do the things in which they want, and that their generation, is feeling somewhat left behind at a very critical time in the last 10 years. I think that what we need to see is to see a government take a proactive approach at trying to build hope, to demonstrate that they believe in the middle class. In this government, more than any other government, I would suggest to you, even more than just the last 10 years. This Prime Minister and this government has put so much focus on the middle class and building the middle class. And two great examples of that is, number one, the Canada Child Benefit Program, a very progressive program that's tax-free, that's going to lift literally hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. That's one. The second one is the first initiative that we took in terms of legislation coming into the House, and that is the tax break, in which over 9.6 million Canadians are directly going to benefit from. That's both policies are going to see literally hundreds of millions of dollars of disposable income being put into the pockets of Canadians in every region of our country. And that is going to benefit, I believe, Madam Speaker, all Canadians. And most importantly, I believe, change the attitude, hopefully provide more hope for Canadians as they see a government that truly believes in the middle class and wanting to support it.
A member for Carleton.
Well, Madam Speaker, the honourable member tries to replace the stats in his government's own budget with hypothetical and unnamed anecdotes of people people who may not even exist outside of the four walls of his own head. I'm quoting data not from some conservative source or think tank. I'm quoting data from the Liberal budget, and it not only shows that middle incomes grew by 11% under the previous Conservative Prime Minister, but that the greatest growth was among female income earners, who saw a 14% increase, an increase that was 5 times the rate as under the Chrétien and Martin governments, and 5 times the rate of the previous Trudeau government. So for a party across the way that talks a lot about the middle class and talks a lot about gender equality, they should look back at the successful outcomes that, according to their own budget, were secured under the previous Conservative government in lifting up the middle class, and in particular, hardworking women who went into the workforce and saw their opportunities expand along with their horizons. Thank you.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Well, Madam Speaker, as I indicated, I was somewhat expecting that we were going to be talking about small businesses. I had a lot of wonderful things to say about small businesses, and instead the member comes forward and he has all these stats, and he says, well, he wants me to use stats. If I was to reflect on stats during the former Conservative government, the one that comes to my mind is the issue of jobs. Imagine the hundreds of thousands, not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs that were lost in the manufacturing industry while the Conservatives were at the reins of power over the last 10 years. Those are stats, Madam Speaker. Real stats that really affected. And when you were making $35, $40 an hour at a manufacturing plant, and you're 45, 50 years old, and you now find yourself unemployed, then try to find a job. And to what degree did the Conservative government assist them in that, Madam Speaker? In one word, not. Instead, Madam Speaker, they had a substantial shift from that $35, $40 an hour job going to $17 an hour jobs, more often than anyone would like to see, Madam Speaker. So if we wanted to talk about stats, I'd invite the member to come back. Hopefully I'll be able to provide a response where we can just do some comparisons just strictly on stats.